if it's all right with you. So feel free to comment or to ask questions in whatever language you are comfortable with. Do you think we need microphones, or can everybody hear well? We have 6 participants with us today. Maybe if I could just say 2 words about SESMI, CEUS, which is interested in working on things like the BBC Scholars blog that is currently run in 3 languages, in Uzbek, Kyrgyz, and English, and we hope that we can broaden this translation of scholarship to a broader public in other ways. So that is one of the initiatives that we have. We also have a growing experts directory, because one of the problems we identified is that it is sometimes very difficult for journalists to quickly find the kind of expertise they need, and that it sometimes has the effect that the same people get asked over and over again on a huge range of different topics on which they may not necessarily be prepared to, or be the best person people to comment, or and that there is a huge range of other scholars that can be drawn into this kind of communication with the media. So I have leaflets in Russian and English. I'll just pass them around. Perhaps look up Tinchnik Picture. Можно взять это с So we have one participant who is unfortunately unable to be present at the conference, but we have the excellent possibility of Skype, so we are using this.
Hello.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Welcome.
I'll use the microphone. I'll use the microphone to talk to Tinchnik Beck. Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you. Yeah, excellent.
Yeah.
Voice is excellent.
Okay.
Thank you.
Excellent. So thank you very much for joining us from Bishkek.
Thank you. Welcome.
Professor Tinchnik Beck is a professor of history at the National University and also former director of Radio Azatuk and worked for many years with RFE-RL. He's on the advisory board of SESMI, and we thank you very much for setting up this Skype meeting with us. So this is the first participant. The second person I would like to introduce is, I'll leave out the microphone now if it's okay, Tinchnik Beck. If you have a problem hearing, please let us know.
Okay. So far it's okay.
The second person I would like to introduce is John Schuberlein, who's a professor of anthropology at the Nazarbayev University, and for long years engaging with the media on Central Asian issues. He was in 2000-2001 director of the International Crisis Group, so instrumental in setting up SESMI in the very early stages 2 or 3 years ago. Thirdly, we have joining us Tina Ratusupova from the press department of Jan Bayer, who's a scholar at Max Planck Institute in Germany, an anthropologist of Kyrgyzstan, and also who's been starting new projects in Burma, Myanmar. Right? And she has engaged particularly with the German media coverage and with the coverage of the events in Kyrgyzstan in 2010.
So she's the author of many books, articles, well known in at least in media sphere in Kazakhstan and in media.
And on that note, I think we can continue this.
Thanks about Gula. It's a very nice journalism school, and I hope our relations is very perfect.
So if I could just add that Gulnara is also on the board of SESMI and co-organized this session together with me. So the structure, or with scholars, because people are working across this professional divide, and to share both the difficulties and the potential solutions they see to particular situations. So we've shared some initial statements to start, and if you like, we will simply go around the room.
Just maybe for the microphone, it would be nice if you all use the microphone because our colleague in Bishkek is not listening. And I cannot hear properly.
Yeah, okay. So there are 2 microphones. So I will keep you very strictly to the time, if I may, okay, so that we have enough time for discussion afterwards. Anton Stekbeck, perhaps you would like to.
Welcome, everyone. I'm going to be commenting particularly on the matter of how a scholar, as functioning as you said, that we might be involved in. I'm doing that not because I think that's the most important part of what this panel should be addressing, but it's the part that I'm most involved in. As John mentioned, I worked as the director of the Central Asia project of the International Crisis Group, when it was based in Osh. So starting just before the events of 9/11, and then following after, which of course was a time when Central Asia became very much in the focus of media attention. One of those moments when the world really cared about Central Asia, it seemed, although obviously in very limited and superficial oftentimes ways. And in that role, part of my job was analysis, but another big part of it was advocacy, which meant talking to anybody that would listen about what policy should be towards Central Asia, and journalists played an important part in this, of course, since they are communicating with the public and with policymakers in particular. But I've also, I was the director of the Central Asia program at Harvard University for about 20 years, and being there, of course, journalists looked for experts in Harvard University, and people tended to direct people to me. So I was often in the role of trying to respond to journalists when they had questions about Central Asia. And sometimes I actively pursued that, although in general, I have to admit that I find these interactions at best problematic sometimes, sometimes very dissatisfying, sometimes more satisfying, but as you'll hear in my comments today, much of what I want to talk about is how you make it a more satisfying experience. That's how you can have a more useful kind of interaction in the context of journalism. And one of the main things that conditions interactions with journalists is the fact that most journalists are working under rather tight deadlines. They're often working with very little background, and many times what they get from speaking with you is, they're only interested in as much as they can use for the particular story that they're working on at the time. So they don't often want a very deep analysis. They find this often confusing and disorienting, not helpful for developing the story that they need to present. And it's often you're dealing with journalists who don't know anything about Central Asia, in the case of somebody who's speaking to the American public about the region. And you want them to understand rather complicated and many-sided events and political situations and things like that. And it's very difficult to do in the time that they're willing to spend and you are willing to spend ultimately in this kind of interaction. So what do you do with that? I mean, what do you do when there's certain kinds of limitations which are set by the kind of understanding that journalists typically are aiming for? And I say typically because there are, of course, different kinds of journalists. In my experience, that ranges from often young people who are very much interested in getting a deep understanding and developing a career focus on the region, to being interviewed on CNN and wondering if this guy that's interviewing me knows anything at all about the topic that he's trying to ask questions about, at the same time as he seems to be quite clear about what kinds of answers that he wants. So it can be a very satisfying sometimes interaction, sometimes very dissatisfying. And I think that the most important thing that journalists, that scholars should keep in mind when they enter these interactions is that they need to provide something to the journalists which the journalists can use. That's the condition of this kind of interaction oftentimes, or most of the time. And what that means is that, of course, the journalists may well have some idea about what they can use when they start the interview, and sometimes you feel like they're being prodded to say something that they think that it would be nice for you to say. Other times it's more open, but in any case, it's useful from the point of view of the scholar to anticipate what kinds of stories the journalist may be wanting to tell. And if that's not the kind of story that you want to tell, then figure out how you're going to direct the conversation in that direction. And you ultimately have to simplify, because in most journalistic contexts it's impossible to present the complexity that's inherent in telling a story about Central Asia, for which the audience has very little background. So the journalist has to begin from a very low level of knowledge in most cases, and then get you to somewhere in terms of understanding of perhaps very complicated events. But you have to present it in a way that doesn't weigh the conversation down in details, which will then leave it to the journalist to pick out which details they are going to focus on. Instead, you're much better off if you can direct them towards the general framework of analysis that is not overly complicated and that can be presented to the kind of audience that they're going to be speaking to. And this sometimes means that you have to be very careful not to say the things that could be cut out of your conversation that fit neatly into the framework that they may be working towards, but which is precisely not what you want to be saying. One of the things that led to the creation of Sesame, for example, was the very difficult events that took place in Kyrgyzstan in the summer of 2010. And these are, of course, extremely complicated events. And there is an ethnic conflict. I mean, there is something ethnic about what's going on there. But all that most journalists wanted to say was, this is ethnic, and that's the beginning and ending of that story. And if you say something that feeds neatly into that narrative, then you become the expert that confirm their preconceptions about what the story really should be about. And so you have to be careful about what you include in what you say. And also, when in some cases, be careful to exclude certain kinds of comments which can be turned into a different direction from what you might intend, leaving out the more important aspects that you want to get across. And one thing one should bear in mind as a scholar is that journalists are also very intelligent people typically. They're just working in a different kind of framework. So when I say that I've been frustrated with my interactions with journalists, it's not because I don't feel like I have interlocutors who are on par with me. It's because they're working in a framework which is different from what I am usually working in. And we have to find a way that conversation can take place that leads to something that's satisfactory from both sides and is useful from both sides. What you don't want to do is spend a lot of time talking with journalists and they're just finding that they don't have anything useful from what you tell them, so you feel like you wasted their time. They're not interested in talking to you again. And so there's a special skill that scholars must acquire to learn to frame your comments in a way that can be useful for this kind of discourse. But once doing that, it can be a very satisfying experience, because oftentimes as scholars, we think we understand things really well, but it doesn't have any impact. Our understanding doesn't have any impact on the broader issues that we think are maybe important in the development of a society. So it's satisfying when we feel like we can have that impact, when we can get through, and especially when we can manage to change the discourses that journalists might enter this conversation with. That is, they may not understand something that's really important that we can then help them to understand. And I see that my time is out, so I will conclude with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. We would like to pass swiftly on to the comments by Judith Meyer on her experience in Germany. So thanks, Judith.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. I think we what John has just mentioned, and what I would like to do is to maybe give you some more examples that I should maybe mention that I always wanted to become a journalist because I grew up in a family where journalism was dominant. My father had a press printing business, and I was working for a regional German newspaper during school and also during university time. And at one stage I decided that I want to do academic research because I didn't have enough time to think as a journalist, because you're under such an enormous amount of time pressure that I have the feeling I cannot do justice to the topics I was supposed to cover. and I dropped out. And I still think that was a good decision, but I understand all of the obstacles which come with journalistic work, and I'm still interested in this dialogue. So if I had to pick out one of the key skills journalists need to have, and very often have, then it's the ability to work under time pressure very fast, and the responsibility to get information from reliable sources. So in 2010, I happened to be in Kyrgyzstan doing field research, and when the events happened, I decided to cover some of this journalistically, simply because I saw that what was covered in, at that time, the American media was very superficial, and it was all about ethnic conflict without providing any sort of context or background. So when I came back to Germany, before I even had started to write something, I was already approached by different journalists, and when I asked them how they found out about me, they said they typed in Kyrgyzstan and Germany, and then my name appeared. So that was their professional way of finding a reliable source, which adds to what Jeanne says, that there is a need for an expert directory and a better connection, which helps finding the link between journalists and academics. So maybe I was lucky that some of the journalists came from very well-known and big newspapers, and also from television channels which are, I would say, providing more complex and detailed information on current political events. So I was in the end very happy with what they were asking me and the outcome. But there were also situations where people from other newspapers had read what was published, or also this TV interview I gave, and they were asking for very superficial information. They tried to give the answers of what was going on in Kyrgyzstan at the moment, and just wanted to use my name to kind of back up the argument. And in these cases, I had several difficult interview situations and told them that I don't want to have this published. There was also a quite funny incident with one of the biggest German weekly newspapers who found out that I had published photo ethnography with that you can turn beautiful pictures of Kyrgyzstan, and they wanted to use these pictures in order to provide some, I don't know what they were thinking, but they wanted to put these pictures of Kyrgyzstan, which were completely detached from the conflict which was going on at that time, together in a major article. And while this would have been nice as a coverage for photo ethnography, I declined this kind of offer because I saw absolutely no connection between what was going on politically in the country and the book I had written in 2007. So I had various experiences about this 2010 event, and tried to come up with an article of my own where I tried to cover it in more detail. And it took me 5 days after I had come back from Kyrgyzstan to finalize it. And by that time, the information had already been outdated. So if you don't manage to provide really good, really fast information, it's almost impossible to find a major outlet, at least for the German media. I don't think the situation will be very much different in other countries, but in Germany at least, the big newspapers work with correspondents who, for Central Asia, very often sit in Moscow, and then they phone their people who work in Bishkek and Almaty and other places in Central Asia, and the outcome of their coverage was not too bad, I would say. So it wasn't as blunt as that there is this ethnic conflict going on, but I would have nevertheless wished for more detailed coverage. And what I did was then to choose online journals like Open Democracy for publication, and this leads me to the final point, namely that my impression is that in terms of writing for big newspapers, at least in Germany, the journalists are doing already a decent job, and that if we want to have an impact as academic scholars in the news, we should maybe aim at regional or mid-level publications or online publications, which are also easily accessible to people, for example, living in Central Asia, especially Open Democracy. If is a website which doesn't pay the authors, but also doesn't make money out of the articles which are being published. And I think this is something important to consider, because I think we should always be very carefully considering whether we're providing this kind of expertise, be it an interview, be it a text for free, or whether we're actually charging for this. And my point in this regard would be to say, if someone's making money with your expertise, then you should demand some kind of compensation. If it's an online journal like Open Democracy, where there's no business involved, I'm willing to work for free. So I'm not sure if we have time to go into these.
From his office in Brzeźnie. Хища, если вы не против, может быть, полезно на русском?
Да. So I try, we can switch to any language, including Kazakh and Kyrgyz. Okay. Thank you for inviting me to this very important to bridge between scholars and journalists. Actually, there were few journalists and few scholars from different countries, and the language was also, the working language was also English. And today we are repeating it, and I would suggest for future to work in a multi-language environment, because we need to invite some more journalists and scholars who don't speak English properly, but they have to be included into this process, because the main, the core of scholars in Central Asia, they don't speak lingua franca, I mean the English. And I wanted just to say some few words about conference which was held in last year. It was about the progress of multi-ethnic society in Central Asia, and in accordance with the suggestions by CESMI, we held also a roundtable discussing the problems of multi-ethnic societies in Central Asia, and how to cover it with help of journalists. And there were several proposals by scholars and journalists in Kyrgyzstan. Actually, one of them were, discussed by several people from CSME. One of them is possible opening of a special column, scholars column in Kyrgyzstani newspaper. It's one thing. Another thing is to work with Facebook and other, venues to discuss, to involve both scholars and journalists, but it's only internet. How to get the rest of audience, we should think of it. And the roundtable is just one way to bridge between them. And the problem of translation of new fact findings into different languages is also important. There is good experience by the BBC World Service. They are publishing the same articles, the same opinion by scholars into different languages, including English, Uzbek, Kyrgyz, and other languages. It's also good to think of it. And if there will be, any financial support, it would be a good idea to open web resource, the website in different languages, including all the main Central Asian languages and including English and Russian. Russian language is still lingua franca for main part of the post-Soviet countries. That's why we should think of delivering information with help of this language as well. After the June 2010 events, the scholars were, silent, and they were only media outlets, journalists who were working not quite with good standards, because sometimes they were reaching only one ethnic group and distributing information based on just one side. And if they would involve scholars, they had some research that their fact finds were important at that time, and they also would work together with the civil society, NPOs and NGOs, NPO and Russian, of course, and they will give their own view, their own solution for the problems. And the Ocean events showed that there is no local conflict. It's common for the whole Central Asian region, like Andijan tragedy or Janaluddin issues. That's why we have to organize a constant bridge between scholars and the journalists for the whole Central Asia, and for those scholars who work in different continents. What is the agenda for CSMI in coming months or coming years? I would say that it will be in different types of direction. One is to reach the journalists and scholars who are working in different languages, in different audiences. Another, to bridge between those resources outside of the region and inside of the region. But the main thing is the ideas so far. But we have to prepare an environment which will be ready for those societies under authoritarian regime. Limit or cut the ties between the suggested resources and those scholars and journalists inside some of the options to work out their website in Switzerland. I would propose the future website will be based not inside Kyrgyzstan or Kazakhstan. The community, the scholars and journalists, it helps us, to work against any possible methods of hijacking these websites and so on. Sorry, I think I might speak even 90 minutes like a professor, but if you have any questions, I am ready.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, is trying to do about the problems that have been raised. But first of all, we have 3 more speakers to share their experience, their difficulties that they find in working with scholars, also because we've heard some of the difficulties, especially working with journalists, so perhaps we can hear a little bit more from the other side, because we realize that we're not that easy to reach, for example, as scholars always. Thank you very much for your comments.
Thank you, John. Сәлеметсіздер, құрметті қонақтар. Назарбаев университетінің шаңырағында осы медиа мәселелеріне арналған дөңгелек үстелге қош келдіңіздер. Добрый день, уважаемые участники, гости, организаторы. Добро пожаловать на круглый стол по медиа, который проходит сегодня в Назарбаевском университете. Меня зовут Динара Дусупова, представляю департамент коммуникации и маркетинга здесь в Назарбаевском университете, и расскажу немного о нашем опыте. Прежде всего, нашу работу в нашем департаменте мы всегда сравниваем с работой ресторана, где я и мои коллеги работаем поварами и официантами. То есть наша задача подать вкусные новости, подобрать самые лучшие ингредиенты, приготовить самые изысканные блюда и подать соответствующим образом, со всем уважением к СМИ, со всем уважением к нашей аудитории, для того, чтобы это запомнилось. Клиент сегодня стал очень избирательным, море информации, поэтому конкуренция, конечно, высокая. В то же время, конечно, это очень большой труд рассказать простым языком о сложных вещах. У нас на Назарбаевском университете мы все время проводим тренинги со школами, с научными центрами о том, как готовить информацию и как подать ее максимально доступно и интересно. В то же время перед интервью различными мы всегда инструктируем коллег рассказать так, чтобы поняла ваша мама или ваша соседка. Вот это наш главный совет, который мы всегда даем нашим коллегам. Назарбаевский университет позиционирует себя не только как образовательное или научное учреждение. Мы очень рады и всегда привлекаем наших профессоров выступать, в том числе медиаэкспертами, имеется в виду экспертами в различных сферах научных, выступать в СМИ по разным вопросам, не только связанным с работой самого вуза. И вот буквально краткая статистика. В 2012 году наш департамент получил более 200 запросов и отреагировал на более чем 200 запросов со стороны средств массовой информации. Это именно по подготовке съемок и проведению интервью со студентами, с преподавателями и с учеными университета. Мы посчитали, что эта цифра превышает количество рабочих дней в году в целом в 2012. То есть можно судить, что работаем мы фактически на передовой. И очень рада, что наши коллеги и наши студенты нам всегда в этом помогают. В целом, резюмируя, я хотела бы отметить, что интерес к науке растет. Допустим, если вы сейчас посмотрите на тот контент, который предлагается на телеканалах, допустим, в печатных СМИ, то в целом интерес к научной тематике на самом деле растет, появляется больше ТВ-программ различных. И очень я рада, что сегодня в республике функционирует специальный отдельный образовательный телеканал БЛМ, открытие которого, кстати, состоялось именно в стенах Назарбаевского университета в прошлом году. Okay, so let me have some time to switch to English. Okay. Welcome, dear guests. My name is Dinara Kasubova. I present here at the Department of Communication and Marketing at Nazarbayev University. I'm a senior manager in the department.
Tonight, yes. Мне кажется, I think that everybody in the room understands Russian well enough to understand your comments. Am I wrong in thinking that? Does somebody actually need translation?
Were you supposed to repeat what you said now?
A bit, yeah.
No, no need.
Okay.
You can develop more if you want.
Yes, please elaborate.
So I'm very quick then.
Yes, you are. So feel free to use the word. Elaborate. Okay.
Если на русском продолжается,
Хорошо. Да. Еще хотела бы добавить, что помимо того мы понимаем, что помимо традиционных каналов подачи информации, каких-то средств массовой информации, конечно, мы стараемся установить и прямой контакт с нашей аудиторией, в том числе и с помощью соцсетей. И вот опять-таки по статистике среди вузов Казахстана Назарбаевский университет занимает первое место по количеству фолловеров в Твиттере. У нас уже почти 2000 приблизилось, учитывая тот факт, что Твиттер мы ведем только исключительно на английском языке. И мы являемся также номер один, занимаем первое место по количеству подписчиков нашего канала на YouTube. Вот. Контент мы генерируем на 3 языках, но в зависимости от вида социального медиа мы выбираем. Некоторые у нас аккаунты исключительно на английском, некоторые на 3 языках, некоторые на 2 языках, на казахском и русском. Все, в принципе, спасибо за внимание.
И когда вы переводили в ученой работе.
Хорошо. Ну, если говорить о таких примерах, то вот обычно перед тем, как назначить какую-то съемку, особенно по научно-исследовательскому проекту, дело в том, что на Назарбаевском университете представлены как гуманитарные, так и технические специальности, причем технические специальности большинство, такие сложные сферы, как биотехнологии, робототехника, к примеру, то обычно всегда перед интервью, перед съемками мы сами проводим беседу и проводим предварительное интервью с нашими коллегами для того, чтобы самим понять суть проекта и немножко потренировать коллегу, и в то же время в случае чего-то самим потом объяснить журналистам простым языком, в чем суть проекта и так далее. Вот. И иногда, конечно, доходит даже до репетиции, особенно вот в ТВ, все понимают, ТВ-сюжет имеет свою специфику, сюжет очень короткий, и синхрон, интервью, цитата должна быть очень короткой. И вот мы тренируем до того, чтобы человек в течение 30 секунд, минуты сумел рассказать самую суть. И вот это как бы всегда находит на практике самое сложное, особенно когда речь идет о каких-то сложных алгоритмах или терминах, которые я сама, допустим, не понимаю. И сначала это все приходится долго, и предварительное интервью с нами занимает гораздо больше времени, чем потом интервью непосредственно с журналистами. Ну, так вот, из личного опыта.
Отлично, спасибо. That earlier. Thank you very much.
Thank you again. Fortunately, I have an option to speak in Russian, and it seems that language issue is very key issue in many senses. First of all, it is very hard division for at least local this language, specific language travel in the professional environment. I mean, media experts, journalists, and scholars, they speak different languages. And as Dinara mentioned, that whether there is a way to prepare especially scholar to speak in common language with journalists, or journalists will do something very terrible with your ideas. So, I would like to deliver my ideas in not damaged way. That is why I will switch off in Russian. Я хотела бы остановиться на одном случае из, в общем-то, такой достаточно многообразной, скажем так, практики взаимодействия со средствами массовой информации. Но я хочу сказать, что в отличие, вот как Жан сказала, что есть две стороны, но так кажется, спасибо, так кажется, что почти все здесь, в этой аудитории панелисты, они имели опыт и журнализма, и научной работы. И вот я тоже как бы вышла из журналистской среды и работала и телевизионным, и газетным как бы журналистом. И очень хорошо понимаю, как рутинизируется процесс, собственно говоря, добывания новостей. То, что Джуди говорила о том, что, к сожалению, работать 5 дней над одной темой, это непозволительная роскошь для журналистики. И, собственно говоря, тогда аналитическую, взвешенную статью просто нигде не, собственно говоря, не примут. Вот. Вот, с другой стороны, вот этот вот постоянный временной прессинг, он действительно он приводит и к износу в профессии, и многим другим вещам, но для читателя это самый, по-моему, большая проблема, потому что читатели в результате вот этого вот временного давления, нехватки времени, они получают такие, знаете, материалы, ну, не хочу сказать легковесные, но малоаргументированные и, как правило, презентирующие только такие кальки такие мысленные, да? Стереотипные ходы. И вот один из таких случаев я как раз хочу презентировать. Речь идет о нескольких видео, доступных в русской зоне интернета в 2011-2013 году. Некоторые даже и сейчас доступны. Это видео насилия в отношении женщин, трудовых мигрантов из Кыргызстана. Это акты насилия производились со стороны соотечественников. И, собственно говоря, никто не может сейчас сказать, когда и кто придумал снимать эти акты насилия на видео и выкладывать в интернет. Журналисты не проводили такого расследования. Ну, вот каким-то образом в конце 2011 года журналисты радио «Азаттык» в Кыргызстане они обнаружили эти видео и посвятили этому несколько телепередач, несколько публикаций на своем сайте. И тема стала медленно, но тем не менее разворачиваться. И почти в течение 1 года разные средства массовой информации так или иначе касались этой проблематики и писали. Причем появились конкретные герои. Одна женщина особенно была в центре внимания, Сапаргуль, имя которой стало нарицательным, собственно говоря, представляя целую группу женщин, которые претерпели это насилие и которые были стигматизированы второй раз, собственно говоря, в процессе публикации, медиа-освещения этой тематики. Вот, и смотрели и освещали, каких экспертов они привлекали, как вообще, в каких рамочках, скажем так, смысловых, логических рамочках это событие освещалось. И когда мы проделали дискурс и анализ всего массива публикаций и видеоматериалов, то мы увидели, что львиная доля, почти треть материалов, она посвящена, так сказать, криминальным, ну, из разряда криминальной хроника. То есть, когда журналисты привычно рассказывали, что вот было событие, и теперь, значит, правоохранительные органы работают над этим делом, и вот они, так сказать, то поймали, то обвинили и так далее, и так далее. А каких-то людей, акторов этого, предположительных акторов этого действия насильственного. Еще один, так сказать, срез или одна тематическая, так сказать, рамочка логическая была связана с обсуждением идентичности мужчин и женщин в современном Кыргызстане, особенно в контексте миграции. И каждый пытался, я имею в виду журналистские материалы, пытались ответить себе на вопрос, кто они, преступники, националисты или действительно поборники за чистоту нравственности и морали нации. И имеется в виду в случае мужчин. И в случае женщин, кто они, жертвы, достойные жалости, или это действительно изменницы нации и так далее, и так далее. Ну, в общем-то, не хочу как бы входить в перипетии, если интересно, могу поделиться как бы и статьей, и деталями этого случая. Но я посмотрела на лист экспертов и увидела, что среди них есть только работники государственных органов, представляющие консульские, дипломатические структуры, которые могли бы адекватно с точки зрения журналистов сказать, как много женщин, мигрантов трудовых в России, почему, собственно говоря, насилие может быть оправдано каким-то образом. Все переводилось на идею о том, что женщины ведут аморальный образ жизни в миграции и так далее, и так далее. Кроме того, были сотрудники правоохранительных структур, в числе экспертов, которые говорили о событиях уголовного дела. И были правозащитники, которые пытались, очень такой небольшой лист правозащитников, которые, и российских, и кыргызстанских, которые пытались говорить о том, что эти акты насилия – это нарушение прав человека, это пытки и так далее, и так далее. Моральную чистоту наций, мужских таких групп, и тех женщин, которые выступают за опыт либерации, скажем так, женщин в трудовой миграции и так далее, и так далее. Вот, и что я подумала?
Event, and I was a participant of the same conference 8 years ago in Boston, and we created a very perfect communication with scientists and continue our relations now. And I hope the communication we created continue our relations too. And I would like to talk about my speech and maybe with another one angle and continue my speech in Russian, okay? Мне кажется, очень важно посмотреть на проблему взаимоотношения ученых и журналистов немножко с другой точки зрения. с той позиции, что мы сейчас движемся от пятого, так называемого, уклада, экономического уклада интернета и телекоммуникаций, к шестому синтезу наук, которые на стыке которых рождаются новые технологии, как генная инженерия, био, нано, когнитивные технологии. И как нам наряду с развитием этих технологий сохранить развивание гуманитарной науки и особенно развивающееся национальное самосознание, этническое своеобразие и самобытную культуру. Собственно говоря, будут ли доступны эти знания широкой общественности? Может быть, это одна из важных тем, поднимаемых именно на этом форуме. Хочу сказать, что 3 года назад наш университет попросил меня как специалиста по коммуникациям и медиа возглавить программу MDP для магистров Sustainable Development. И мне показалось невероятно сложным объединить студентов разных факультетов, но это факультет естественный, гуманитарный. Но наше общение привело меня просто в такой восторг, потому что, оказывается, вот такой микс студентов с разных специальностей, он приводит к созданию потрясающих идей. И мне захотелось, чтобы этот мир увидели и другие люди. И я считаю, что ключом от двери в этот мир является создание правильного общения. Вообще, программа MDP, я просто чуть-чуть расскажу, это Sustainable Development, она объединяет 24 университета мира, Азии, Северной и Южной Америки, Европы и Африки. И была предложена в свое время учеными Колумбийского университета Джеффри Саксом и Джоном Махартоном. И надо сказать, что после присоединения нашего университета к этой программе впервые логотип нашего университета появился на сайте Колумбийского университета. Я считаю, что это, наш рейтинг это повысило, поскольку это один из топ-университетов. Когда я познакомилась с ними, я поняла, что они занимаются очень серьезными вопросами, как в области самых разных сферах. Это энергетика, это экология, это область космической техники, химии, биологии, информатики и многие другие.
And first of all, we'll give you an opportunity to ask questions of the speakers. I think in the interest of time, I will collect questions straight away. So, and the main issues that we would like to debate here also is to hear from your experience, positive, negative, with interaction between the sphere of the media and scholarship. And also to hear about your ideas for solutions. So SESME has, as you have already heard, launched several ideas. For example, the collaborative scholars blog between BBC Central Asia and SESME, which is in 3 languages currently. Also the experts directory that you already heard about. And Tinchdik Beck and Bunara also mentioned a possible workshop to give scholars in Bishkek, in particular, media skills also not only conducted in the English language, but other languages that they may use. So I would invite your questions, and perhaps if you... Yes, I would like to pose questions together.
Okay. Hi. Thank you. Thank you. I do not have that much experience with journalism because people don't really care about a guy who counts sheep or draws kinship diagrams or something like that. But I have a question, not to a particular person maybe, and a comment which may make the whole thing a bit broader, but anyway. Several of you addressed directly, it seems to me, but it's very important, is the market logic according to which maybe not so much online issues, but other journals do have to follow, and which may have the consequence that even journalists who are aware of the problems that are connected with making things too superficial do not have that much of a choice because they have to respond to a readership or to an editorship, etc., etc. So that would be kind of a question, to what degree these people are aware of that, to what degree they just don't care, to what degree you can have an input in that. That would be the question. And the comment goes broader than that in the sense that this type of market logic is different in academia, but it is also growing to some degree. So that research proposals that we write more and more have to follow a particular demand on the public side. So Switzerland is not only easy to register an organization, it is also still relatively good in terms of funding, but it was very clear and made to all the social sciences that we should look on projects who focus either on climate change or on health, which makes it much easier to get funding for the next couple of years. And this is also about a public, right? It's not the media thing, but it's about the public, and it's a broader issue. I mean, there's a legitimate right of a public to ask for answers by people who are sponsored and financed in whatever sense by the public. So that would be kind of a comment that put the whole thing into a larger perspective.
In 2010, everybody has facing the OSH events is the part of Western media towards Central Asia and how we can influence or give also our contribution to a better understanding. And here the issue you brought of language, for me, is more of the national language where we are living. The journalists in France will never read a document in English. So for us, it's really to bring it in French and to be able to bring what is produced or what we know from Central Asia to their ears. So the network or the collaboration you have, for instance, with BBC is very interesting, but it will not serve, for instance, French. And that's my question is, how do you plan to have your network, CESME, whatever you want to call it, influential in all these countries where you have a national language issue? Not sure in Germany we have the same, maybe journalists will be able to reach or have access to English sources, but not in France. And for me, just to put also an input in your discussion, what was important, and I realize and I agree fully with all you say, John, and you did on this, is that the journalist...
То, наверное, журналисты никогда не поймут ученых, и ученые не осмелятся, да, не потому что они считают, что они могут вместе с тем, что журналисты их не всегда понимают.
With a couple of words to explain CESME or CESUS in Russian at the moment, we have to think of different acronyms in different Central Asian languages yet. I passed around a leaflet that explains a little bit about the basics of what we do at the moment. As I mentioned earlier, Gunnar Baraiva is also on our board, so if you have questions to herself or myself, I'm currently serving a term as president, and I'm very sorry I didn't introduce myself at all. My name is Jean-Pierre Lacroix. I work at the Center for Moderne Orient in Berlin, and I'm an anthropologist. I mainly work in Kyrgyzstan. So, just to follow up also on Olivier's question about what CESME and CEU's agenda is, we understand ourselves as an umbrella organization, right? We welcome any of your ideas and your activities in relation to fostering better working relationships between journalism and a broader public for our scholarship. And that can be on very hot topics and places where you see a need for anticipation rather than just reactive and very often disappointing kind of responses on the part of scholars in relation to crises. But also Alexander Morrison, for example, published a very nice article on the BBC Central Asia CESME scholars blog about the history of railways in Central Asia. I mean, there are also not so hot topics, and yet ways that we can contribute and share what we learn and the relevance of what we research. As you mentioned, this is, I think, a concern we all share here. So for future projects, I told you a little bit what is already happening. You can find us on Facebook, both as just a Facebook page and as a discussion group that you can join. We also have a website that you can look up and communicate with us with. And for future ideas, Gumara and Kunstwerk are involved in setting up a workshop in Bishkek to foster media skills among local scholars in particular. We are also thinking about developing something like a kind of beginner's handbook, both for journalists and for scholars, because for journalists it's not obvious how to interact with us and get the best out of us either, right? And that would also be in several languages, hopefully, and possibly through Wikipedia also. Okay, about languages, one of the main questions that we have here is that it takes a lot of capacity, actually, as Dinara will know, to translate everything that you do, and to try to convey messages in different language arenas. And as you mentioned, the divisions between these arenas of communication have led to things like some people talk about informaционная война, things like that, which is can be very damaging. So one thing that we're also trying to just do is to create events where journalists and scholars can very simply meet and hear about what the other people are doing and establish trusting relationships. And with a particular scholar and a particular journalist, I think that's one of the keys, is actually also simply networking. Right? We don't know many journalists generally. We work as historians, for example, of Central Asia, perhaps. So those are just some quick things I wanted to mention about SESME. And my last very pleasant obligation is to thank all our panelists for coming, for preparing themselves, for sharing their knowledge and their ideas, and also to you as an audience for your interest and also your critical questions. And we welcome continuing this conversation perhaps in the coffee break or over the course of the conference. Thank you very much.